Hello, I'm Hannah and welcome to my podcast, Don't Tell Me to Relax, the antidote to unhelpful fertility information. I'm a fertility acupuncturist and educator, and this podcast aims to empower and inform you about your menstrual cycle and your fertility. It's basically all that information you didn't get in sex education at school, with the aim of helping you improve your reproductive health and increase your chances of conception. Hello and welcome to episode number 3. I am again joined by lovely Katie, and today we are going to be talking all about the period, because in many ways I guess the period for lots of people is the most obvious bit of their menstrual cycle, and it is the bit that we talk about the most. It's the bit that can cause so many problems, so that is what we're going to be doing today. So Katie, what's your best word for period?
Jammies is a good one. I'm on my jammies. But I also call my pyjamas my jammies sometimes, so you know.
Jimmy jams.
Yeah. Always enjoyed riding the crimson wave as well, because they're just sort of ridiculous. But how about you?
I love I've got the painters in.
It's just so stupid, aren't they?
They really are. There's just so many of them. The blob, I always find, is really quite offensive. And I think the curse, joking aside, it being referred to as the curse is really significant, isn't it? Because for so many people, that is how their period actually is. It causes so many problems. You can see why that was a popular word used in a different time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're going to be looking at the period with this episode, and we're going to look at actually what a period is and why does it start. We're going to look at what a healthy period is, because this is what's important, because there is such a thing as a good period. It's a good, healthy period. It definitely does not have to be a curse. We're going to look at what problems to look out for, and these are for your health, but they are also for your fertility. So if you're trying to conceive, a problematic period could really be a big red alarm for issues that might be impacting your fertility. And we are going to look at what to do when you've got problematic periods, like where do you go for support and how do you speak to your doctor? Does that sound all right, Katie? Does that sound like we're covering everything?
Yeah, I think it's a solid place to start from.
I like the fact that you are in a red jumper today as well. I've just realised.
I did plan it.
Did you put that on purpose?
I did. So I could get into the do my method acting.
Well, I'm wearing my vulva vagina necklace.
Love it.
In whatever the word is for today's episode. So yeah, we're both come on brand, haven't we?
Yeah. Great.
So we're going to kick off with what a period is. So a period is the bit of your menstrual cycle where the uterus lining sheds and it's released through the cervix and the vagina. And your period is actually blood and also tissue. So it's not just blood, it is actually tissue from the uterus lining. And the period begins when your hormones drop. So if you are not pregnant, so if there is no embryo embedded in your uterus lining, what happens is that your progesterone levels and your estrogen levels will drop. And this drop signals for your brain to release I think it's not a hormone. I think it's like a protein called I forgot the word now.
Prostaglandins.
Thank you. Prostaglandins is released.
I think they're like a lipid, like a type of fat partly as well.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, it's definitely not a hormone, but it's sort of like a hormone in that it's a messenger to signal something to your body to do something to your body. It's like a sign, isn't it? So it signals to the uterus to start contracting, and it produces a kind of inflammation response. So your uterus starts to contract, and this inflammation causes the lining to shed and to break away, and the contraction sort of forces the blood out and the uterus lining out, and this is what we experience as a period or our menstrual bleed. And an interesting geek fact, because you know that we love them, is if you are somebody who always has that kind of, we call them period poos, when you get your period, or just about when you're about to get your period, if you notice that your digestion changes, and lots of people get looser bowels, more frequent bowels at this point in their cycle. And that is because your uterus and your bowel are right next to each other, and the prostaglandins, they kind of impact your bowel as well as your uterus lining. So if you think that your uterus is contracting, that is also passed on into the bowel and causes your bowel to contract even more, which is why you can have period poos. Something we like to talk about.
It's one of my favourite facts, you know.
It's a good one, isn't it?
I think it's amazing that because your gut has estrogen receptors the whole way through it.
Yeah.
So like, of course, it's going to respond to different changes in your hormones like throughout your menstrual cycle. So like, they are really linked, which is just pretty interesting.
Yeah, and it's something that people often will say in clinic, that they get this change in digestion around the period, which, you know, is actually a normal part of having a period. It's not actually something to be concerned about with your digestion. It's sort of part of the body having its clear out, I guess.
Yeah.
It's kind of a clear out and a reset.
Yeah. The next thing that we wanted to talk about is what is a good period and why is it important for your fertility? So often, period, like we were just saying about like the curse or whatever, it's like there's a real lack of discussion about like what's a good period, and embarrassment means that people like they're not coming and like discussing what's normal and what isn't normal. So like there's a real kind of lack of understanding of like what you actually want your period to look like, and understanding that your period is a really good way to check in with like your cycle and your health and like what's going on there and any issues that could be kind of like underlying. So if you know what to look out for, then you can understand your cycle, which then might be impacting your ability to conceive. So what you want in terms of like a good period is to be looking at your flow. So is it too light versus too heavy? So light would be if it's like less than 2 days, like very minimal bleeding. Like we often kind of hear people being like, yeah, my period's really light and it's great. And it's like, particularly in terms of like fertility and health, that's not necessarily the best thing if your period is like too light in its flow, but also if it's like very light in colour, so more like pink or anything. And this could kind of indicate to us that like maybe your estrogen levels aren't quite where we want them to be, because estrogen builds that base layer. So that's what's going to give you some lining to shed ultimately. We also want to be thinking about if your period's too heavy. So if your period's more than like 5 to 7 days, like then you really want to be kind of looking at like what's going on there. If it's very heavy, so like 80 millilitres of blood loss max is a lot. So kind of looking at how much your tampons or pads, period pants, like how much they absorb, just so you can kind of gauge how much you are bleeding. That's good to have an idea of, because if you're used to bleeding a lot, you might not be realizing actually like this is too much. Things that might be causing you to have heavy bleeding, or if you have like a thyroid issue, fibroids, hormone imbalances, can also like lead then to, maybe if you're having very heavy periods, like your iron could be really low, so maybe you feel really like depleted and knackered. So like they're all things to kind of be checking in with. I also think if you flood, you know, if you find that it's kind of a bit out of control, and that you're going through you're having to double up, or you're flooding at night, if you're having to like replace your period product more than every like 2 to 3 hours, that's too often. So being aware of like how often you're changing things, and if it is just like you're bleeding through stuff, then again something to be looking into. Another thing in terms of bleeding is spotting. So when you get a bit of kind of light blood, like just a little bit, maybe it's kind of in some mucus or something, but you're seeing some blood either before your period starts or like mid-cycle. So if you get mid-cycle bleeding, that's sometimes associated with having like a very sharp rise in estrogen, which isn't exactly what we want to be happening. We want it to be a much more kind of steady incline, so your body can respond to those rising levels of estrogen and let that lining build. Whereas if you have bleeding in like the sort of week or so leading up to your period, that's a really clear indicator there's low progesterone. And progesterone is a really important hormone, particularly if you're thinking of trying to conceive, because that's the hormone that's going to help you maintain early pregnancy. So you don't want to be having spotting, whether that's mid-cycle or before your period. Your period should have a very clear start and end.
Yeah, brilliant. Brilliant, because your flow is a real indicator of what's happening with your uterus lining, whether it's too little, too much. And the big thing, I think, if you've got heavy periods to look out for and to check is always your iron levels, because how many people do we see with low iron? I mean, it's a lot. Yeah. And, you know, you can feel really rubbish with low iron. It can cause headaches, it can cause dizziness, breathlessness, tiredness.
Yeah, the fatigue for a lot of people.
Low mood, I think it can be linked to low mood.
I think so.
Yeah. So it's a big one. I think it's always important to check. So I was going to talk about pain, because pain, again, is a really big one. And, you know, we've spoken in previous episodes about this idea that if your period has always been heavy or always been light or always been painful, it's very easy to assume that that is normal. And, you know, maybe that everybody in your family has those kind of periods. But, you know, that is why we have these conversations and why we talk about it so much with our patients, is that pain is not a normal part of a period.
Not at all.
You know, going back to that definition of the curse, that curse suggests pain, doesn't it? You know, I've been cursed with the pain. And periods should not be painful, even though history kind of suggests that it is something that we just have to put up with. Absolutely, from a biological point of view, it is not something to be put up with. And if your period is painful, it is an indicator that something is not working well, and this could be affecting your health, and it will definitely be having an impact on your fertility. So really important to look at. And it's interesting as well, isn't it, the definition of pain, because I don't know about you, Katie, but I have worked with so many people who really dismiss their pain because they're so used to it.
Just minimise it completely, where they're just like, oh, well, like, it's a bit, I don't know, I just feel a bit crap some days. And and then like, I've like blacked out before, and you're like, what? And they just say it like it's nothing because they're so used to it. And it's like, like any pain beyond mild cramping on like the first day of your period, because at the end of the day your uterus is contracting, so some very, very mild, like very, very light, not stopping you from doing anything in your life, just a bit like, oh yeah, there's a little bit of cramping, but you're absolutely happy as Larry to carry on with your day, is like all that's acceptable, really. Anything beyond that, like, it's not okay. Yeah, exactly. And I think from a clinician point of view, we've really got to ask good questions, because if you say to somebody, is your period painful? Somebody who's experienced pain and gets used to pain will be like, no, it's okay. But if you question further, so does it stop you doing your work? Does it stop you going to school? Do you have to use a hot water bottle? Do you take painkillers? Does it not work? Are there any other associated problems? So migraines, dizziness, vomiting, you know, how many people have, vomit just because their pain is so bad. These are indicators that the level of pain is out of control and is definitely not normal. I quite like getting people to rate it out of 10, so like 1 being like, or 0 being nothing and 10 being really high, and then telling them like anything more than a 1, it's like not okay. Because a lot of people go, oh, I guess it's like an 8 or a 9 sometimes, and I'm like, so like 9 out of 10 pain we're talking about here, like that's pretty horrific if you're having that for several days a month. And
what is it, how many periods do we have over a lifetime,
like
did we
400
say?
I think it was.
So it's too much, and it needs
years of your life you'd be in pain.
And you know, it again is similar to the heaviness. It could be a sign of thyroid problems. It could be a sign of endometriosis or adenomyosis. It could be a sign of fibroids. It could be pelvic inflammatory disease. And all of these things are going to impact your health. So let's always start there. But if you are trying to get pregnant, then all of these things could be a barrier to getting pregnant, because there could be a problem in terms of the implantation of embryos. You know, if you've got lots of adenomyosis or endometriosis, that can really impact it. We also know that if you have these conditions, it can really affect your progesterone levels and the receptivity of your endometrium for the hormone progesterone. So, you know, often people do have lower progesterone levels with these conditions. So it's really important that it gets investigated. So pain and flow are two things to look out for. Katie, there was one more that we really want to highlight to look out for.
So the frequency of your period. So when we're talking about cycle lengths, or like we're talking about from one period to the next. So this isn't about how many days you bleed. This is from like day one of your cycle, which we've established before being the day that your period starts, to when that happens again. So what we ideally want that to be is every 24 to 36 days. So the idea of a 28-day cycle isn't really...
But I think it's 5%.
It's something stupid.
Really low, yeah.
And I think the actual average is like 29 days or something. It's like, it's not 28. Like, you don't need to be aspiring to a 28-day cycle to have a healthy cycle. So, but if your cycles are longer or shorter than this 24 to 36 days, then like that can give us a kind of indicator of maybe some other things that are going on. So people that have maybe like very long times from like one cycle to the next might have something like polycystic ovarian syndrome, because this can cause ovulation to be delayed. Maybe it's like your lifestyle factors. So stress is another big thing that can impact your cycle length. So maybe it could, so there's a really big link between stress and progesterone levels. And when you're very stressed, perhaps your progesterone, so the second half of your cycle can shorten, and that could mean you get your period earlier, or it could delay your ovulation, which would then make your cycle much longer. Coming off contraception, if you've had a really long history of hormonal contraceptive use, that can impact your cycles. It can take like 6 to 12 cycles for your hormones to normalize and get back into a rhythm. So like your cycles might be a bit all over the place after you've been on hormonal contraception.
Yeah.
Thyroid issues. Thyroid is a really big thing that impacts your fertility. So just making sure you're getting that checked, getting a full thyroid panel done if you think there is an issue there. And also problems with the pituitary gland. So sometimes if people haven't had a period in a really long time, actually it's to do with their pituitary gland and what's going on there. So worth investigating if your periods are too long or too short, and just making sure you're getting some support with whatever's going on, because all of these things often can be quite easily supported given the right support.
Yes, and it's important that these are the main things, I would say, the most important things. There's lots of small bits of detail from a period and a menstrual cycle that can give you clues. And when you work with someone like either myself or Katie, then we spend a long time really talking to people about the day they ovulate, the day they have their period. Like we go into a lot of detail because we can get so much information. But if you're tracking your cycle yourself and you want the sort of headline things to look out for and check in with your cycle, then, you know, flow, pain and frequency would be the three big hitters, I would say. And we know that all of these things need to be working well for good cycle, good health and good fertility. So if you are somebody and you have got problems and you've thought, oh, actually, this is me, like if we've spoken, if you've heard something on this episode and you think, actually that happens to me, what can I do about it? Well, what we would say is that it's really good to track and record your symptoms. We've talked about this before, and we will do a whole episode about it because it is really important. But tracking and recording your symptoms is really good because it gives you a body of evidence, which then helps support your case when you go and see your doctor. So, book an appointment to go and see your doctor. It can be really helpful to book a double appointment, so 2 appointments back to back, because the thing that we often hear is that people feel like they've not been given enough time to really sit down and explore it with their doctor. So if you book a double appointment, if you can get one, because let's face it, at the moment it is quite difficult, then that can be really helpful. And take your notes, like take your charts, take your app and sit down and show your doctor everything that's been happening to you. Rate your pain, make sure you're rating your pain so that they really are taking that seriously, and your flow as well. Show them that or discuss with them that it's flooding, that you're feeling dizzy, that you're feeling really low in energy at that point of your cycle, because hopefully it will then encourage them to get to the root cause of the problem. Because what you want to do in this situation is, rather than be given either tablets to stop the blood flow, painkillers, or the pill. You want investigations so you can work out why this is happening, because it's not normal. So I think as a sort of bare minimum, if this was a client I was working with and I'd sent them to the GP, I'd be asking them to get a full hormone panel. So I'd be asking their GP to give them a full hormone panel. I'd be asking them to get their thyroid checked. I'd be asking them to ask their GP to get their iron levels checked and their vitamin D levels checked, because we know that they're really important for menstrual cycle and for fertility. And I would also be asking for a transvaginal scan. So this is a camera that's inserted through the vagina up through the cervix to look at your uterus and to see what's happening, because it can help identify polyps, fibroids, have a look at your lining, see whether there's anything going on that could be causing underlying issues. So they would be like my sort of basic starting point of where, you know, what tests to get and what investigations you want to get done if you're having problems with your period. On the other option as well is to work with somebody like myself or Katie or a menstrual cycle coach, because there are a lot of people now who specialise in this area, because we know that there are so many things that you can do to support if you've got problematic periods. And that's what we spend a lot of time doing, is looking at lifestyle, looking at nutrition, looking at stress, looking at sleep, looking at exercise, all the things, you know, that come together that can really help improve your period if you are having a problematic one. But I think we would always say, won't we, Katie, it's important to investigate from a kind of biomedicine point of view,
absolutely,
as well as all the stuff that that we can do.
100%. And I think some other things, if you're going to see your GP, that can be helpful to know is like, ask, but you can like record the appointment on your phone, so you've got like an audio of what happened in the appointment, just because sometimes when we're in those situations you kind of can forget what was said, and like, or you're just trying to say everything clearly and you're like, I don't remember what I said or what I didn't. So that can be a really good way. Also, you can take someone into the appointment with you to kind of help you like advocate for yourself, because sometimes again we can play things down, but like maybe your partner's like, it's more than that, isn't it, kind of thing, or just they're able just to kind of support you through that, because sometimes when we're really struggling with something, just knowing there can be someone else's voice there to support us can be a helpful thing to do. And is there anything else?
I was going to say, if you're not happy, get a second opinion.
Yes.
Or go somewhere like, you know, I'm not saying
you can change
up.
GP surgeries if you're not happy with the way you're being treated. Like, that is something. It's not the easiest thing to do necessarily, but it is an option that's available to you. Like, if you're not happy with the treatment that you're getting, then seek a second opinion, either with a different GP within your surgery, or you can change surgeries. Yes.
And sometimes it's quite helpful to ring up and ask if there's anybody who specialises in women's health, like, because often GPs will have various specialisations, won't they? So sometimes there's ones who specialise in fertility and women's health, and so it might be worth seeking those out if you've not had success with a different GP, I would say. Yeah. Fantastic. So I think that is all we're going to say for today on period. Is there anything else that you want to say, Katie, and do you want to do a roundup of what we've talked about today? Yeah, I think we've covered like good amount of stuff there. So the things that what we really want you to be looking at in terms of your period, so things to start like noting down and tracking, is your pain. So what is the pain like? Where in your body do you have it? Like rating it, kind of having an awareness of what days of your cycle the pain appears, tracking what the flow is like. So is it very light? Is it very heavy? Looking at the colour, like, is it just very pink and light with a light flow, or is it like very dark brown, red? Like, that's an indicator there's like old blood that maybe isn't clearing very well. And then also the frequency of your period. So from one period to the next, how many days it's that. And just remembering that your period gives us lots of messages and clues as to like what's going on with your hormones, the rest of your cycles, any underlying health issues. Like, it's something that you want to be paying attention to. You don't want to just be being like, oh, I've got my period, I'm going to turn a blind eye and pretend it's not happening. Like, you want to tune into like what it's like, how you experience it, and just taking note of that. So if there are any issues, then you can very clearly go and get help from your GP and or someone like Hannah and me. And there's like we have a lot of information that we can work with then if you're tracking like this. Yeah. Brilliant. So we hope that has been super helpful, and let us know how you get on. Thanks, Katie.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks so much for listening. I hope you have learned something helpful about your reproductive health and your fertility. If you would like to find out more information, then please come and join us in our free community on Facebook. We have tons of resources, access to our webinars, we do live Q&As, and it's a chance to connect with other people who are trying to conceive. The link to register is in our show notes, and we hope to see you there.